When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
Thank you for listening to The History of the Papacy. I'm your host, Steve. You can find show notes, how to contact me, sign up for our mailing list, and learn how to support the history of the papacy by going over to the website a2zhistorypage.com. Speaking of supporting the show, Patreon is a great option to do that. We're at patreon.com/History of the Papacy. There's 4 tiers representing the 4 traditional patriarchates of Christianity: Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, and Rome. The biggest benefit for you is that you are included on the History of the Papacy diptychs. And the sooner you sign up to become a Patreon on patreon.com/History of the Papacy, the higher you will be on the list of the History of the Papacy diptychs. Now, let me mention one special benefit that I'm just launching now, and that is called Pope Coin. Pope Coin is like Bitcoin, but more popey, you might say. It's like cryptocurrency in that there's only a very small number of Pope Coins, and about a quarter of them are already spoken for. So if you want to get on that train, you've got to sign up sooner rather than later, or that will be an opportunity missed, just like buying Bitcoin when you could buy a whole Bitcoin for almost nothing. But speaking of the History of the Papacy diptychs, let us commemorate the Patreon patrons on the History of the Papacy diptychs. We have Roberto, Joran, William, Brian, Jeffrey, Christina, John, Sarah, and William H. at the Alexandria level. We have Dapo, Paul, Justin, Lana, and John, all of whom are magnificent at Constantinople. And reaching that ultimate power and prestige, that of the See of Rome, we have Peter the Great, Leonard the Great, and Alex the Great. And I would also like to send out a very special thank you to our latest patron at the Antioch level. We have Jacob. Thank you so much, Jacob, and to all of the people who support the show. As you well know, we are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, and one of the great shows you should check out is the show of today's guest, James Early's Key Battles of American History. Go over to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more. Today's episode was originally published a while back, but I wanted to bring it back to the fore because the several episodes I've recorded with James Early were the impetus for this whole series on Celtic Christianity. I've recorded many episodes with Dr. Carly McNamara. She formed the backbone of the series, and I greatly appreciate her help. But we also had help from Annie Humphreys and Giada Latanzio. Dr. McNamara reached out to me to record a one episode on Celtic Christianity and to just add some context to these episodes I recorded with James. That one episode Dr. McNamara thought she was signing up for turned into a 16-part series. I'm extremely grateful to all the guests who helped in making this series. It would have never happened without them. So let's get back and reconnect with the Anglo Saxons and Christianity. And with that, here is the next piece of the mosaic of the history of the popes of Rome and Christian Church. We're going to talk about the complicated cultural, political, and religious situation of the British Isles in the 400s and 500s AD. This episode will fit into the larger story of how different peoples, also known as barbarians, entered the Roman Empire and mixed with the existing populations. We talked about the Vandals a while back. We also talked about the Franks. Today, we will talk about the Anglo Saxons, and we will definitely get into the Visigoths in Spain in an upcoming episode. Today, we are joined by a special guest to help navigate us through this complicated time. If you listen to my other podcast, Beyond the Big Screen, or Scott Rank's History Unplugged podcast, then you will be familiar with Professor James Early. James is an adjunct professor of history at San Jacinto College in Pasadena, Texas, just near Houston. He has published one book and 2 scholarly articles. He also runs a blog and Facebook group called American History Fanatics. His main areas of research and interest include Eastern European history, the American Civil War, and the Cold War. Thank you so much for coming on today, James.
It's great to be here, Steve. I'm honored and excited to be on this podcast for the first time. I'm a long-time listener, first-time guest.
Now, a lot of people do know you as an American history guy. Why are we talking to you today about Anglo-Saxon church history?
That's a very good question. That's fair. Well, my reputation, I guess, as an American history person is relatively recent because when I was doing my master's, and even before my master's, I was really into European history. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I just got interested in the Anglo Saxons. They're largely forgotten today, and people just don't know that much about them. And they have this fascinating language they spoke, Old English, which has some similarities to what we speak today, but in many ways is very, very different. So I just started reading about the Anglo Saxons. I even got some information on the language and some courses on tape and or CD. I said tape. I'm dating myself there. Anyway, I learned a little of the language and read a little of their writing in the original language. Not too much. It's fairly challenging, but I just read one book and I thought it was really great. So I read another book and another book and another book. And for long, I'd really built up some knowledge about the political history of the Anglo-Saxons, but also their church history, because church history has always been a hobby of mine. I've read quite a bit on church history in general, and so that's how I got into that. My specialty in my master's program, as I mentioned, was European history, and I focused mainly on Southeastern Europe, especially the Balkans, Serbia, Bulgaria, and the other countries in that area. But I did take a whole course on the Anglo-Saxons, which I actually designed myself. I approached this one professor who specialized in Western Europe, and I said, how about teaching a course on the Anglo-Saxons? And he says, I don't really know that much about them, but if you want to design a course, I'll supervise it. So I picked out the readings and assigned myself a bunch of papers, and we did it. So there it is. It's been a while since I've done a lot of study on the Anglo-Saxons, but hopefully we'll be okay today.
Let's dive right in here and tell us, what was the religious and cultural political situation in England at the time of the Anglo-Saxon invasions? We're talking like early 400s. What was going on there?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to back up even a little bit further just to go kind of from the very beginning. The original inhabitants, the inhabitants of the British Isles, if you will, at the time of the Roman invasion were Celtic peoples. And they weren't even originally from Britain. It's believed that long ago, many, I don't know, a couple 2,000-3,000 years ago, they migrated into the British Isles from the continent of Europe. But by the time the Romans showed up, they had been there for quite some time. And so the people spoke a Celtic language, or a series of Celtic languages. I'm sure they had at least different dialects, if not different languages, or they would have been similar to the modern Irish language or the Scottish Gaelic language or Welsh, but of course much earlier forms of those, and probably not intelligible by modern speakers of Celtic languages. So the Romans decided to go over there. Our old buddy Julius Caesar, who loved to travel around and conquer things, never met a country he didn't want to conquer, right? But Caesar shows up in 55 BC, but he didn't establish permanent control of Britain. It was almost just like a excursion, if you will, with forces. He went over there and busted some heads and then went back home, and we know what happened to him. But the Romans later went back, about 100 years later, 43 AD, under the Emperor Claudius, and then they set up permanent control, or at least long-term control of the British Isles. And what happened was you had a blended culture. The Romans set up what they always did everywhere they went. They set up cities, they set up camps, they set up baths. They all the trappings of Roman society were introduced into Britain, and the inhabitants there, a lot of them really liked it. Some of them didn't and rebelled from time to time, and the Romans would brutally put it down as they do. But for the most part, you developed a blended culture, which is usually called Romano-British, or I may just eventually just call it British, but with, some elements of Roman culture and some elements of British culture. I need to talk about Christianity too. Christianity, of course, comes along with the Romans. We don't know when the first Christians or the first conversions occurred in the British Isles. There's a legend of Joseph of Arimathea going to Britain and introducing Christianity and taking the cup of Christ and all that. But that's probably just a legend. There's no way to prove it or disprove it. But we know that there was definitely a Christian presence no later than the 3rd century. It may have even come earlier than that. We just don't know. There's no solid archaeological evidence that clearly tells us any dates, and there's not much written evidence. We know about St. Alban, the first martyr who died in Britain in the mid 3rd century. But so Christianity was there pretty early on, 3rd century, maybe even 2nd century. But that doesn't mean that the pagan practices that the Celtic people had practiced, they were pagans just like almost all European inhabitants. They had several gods. We don't know too much about their deities. But what developed after the Romans came, before they brought Christianity, of course, they brought their pantheon and their, I guess you would call it polytheism. They brought their gods. And what would happen is, as often happened in a polytheistic system, is you develop this hybrid where the Romans would say, well, who are your gods? And they would say, well, this is our god of the sky. This is our god of the water. And they would just introduce them into the Roman pantheon. So you got a blended, or they would even combine gods, which is not uncommon in polytheistic systems, as already mentioned. So there was quite a bit of pagan practice, and it was still present by the time the Anglo Saxons appeared, although I think Christianity was probably more dominant, especially in the cities. In the rural areas, as is usually the case at this time in Europe, you still had a lot of paganism going on. There is evidence for the strength of Christianity, including things like the fact that, there's independent testimony from writers like Tertullian and Origen, who both were writing around 200 AD. They allude to a strong Christian presence in Britain. There were British bishops, sorry, I can't say it, but there were bishops who traveled to other parts of the empire. There were actually three, at least we have a source that says there were 3 British bishops at the Council of Arles. That was in 314. It condemned the Donatist heresy. So they traveled quite a ways to go to that council. The British Church was also represented by bishops at the councils of Sardica, 347, and Arminium, 359. You also have the story of St. Patrick, which shows that English Christianity was strong enough to send missionaries over to Ireland to try to convert the Irish. And the Irish are going to return the favor later, as we'll see. But the fact that Patrick was an Englishman, the story of St. Patrick says that his father and grandfather, one of them was a deacon and one was a priest. I forget off the top of my head. But so it's clear that you had a significant Christian presence. In fact, one of the ways to tell if your practice or your presence, your Christian presence is strong is, do you have an original heresy pop up? So we know in the East, there were so many heresies, or deviant or different ways of expressing the faith. But the Pelagian heresy, or Pelagian, which St. Augustine of Hippo is going to fight against, that actually originated in Britain. Pelagius, the originator of that heresy or that practice or that belief, that he was from Britain. So there you go. It's strong enough to have an original heresy. So it's believed that, again, just to sum up, that when the Anglo Saxons arrived in the 5th century, there was a substantial Christian presence, but also quite a bit of paganism hanging around, especially in the rural areas.
And now a word from our sponsors.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio online or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
AI can help you write, research, and solve problems faster than ever before. But there is a problem. Most AI is built on a worldview that does not reflect biblical truth. That's why Dominion Chat exists. Dominion brings the power of AI under the lordship of Christ. All the benefits of modern AI built on a biblical worldview foundation. Your work matters, but so does your soul. Sign up today at dominion.chat.
What do we know about the actual ecclesiastical and the church organizational structure in Roman Britain?
Unfortunately, we do not know as much as we would like. We don't know hardly anything, to be honest with you. We don't have any documents saying, okay, the British church had a bishop in this city and an archbishop in this city and a bishop here and a bishop there. That's lacking. Scholars... Well, I want to back up and just say that archaeological evidence, there is some, but it's always open to interpretation. I guess any type of evidence is, but archaeological evidence is especially hard to interpret sometimes. We know, as I mentioned earlier, that there were at least 3 bishops in Britain at the Council of Arles who went to the Council of Arles in 314. So maybe there would have been at that time more than 3 bishops. I mean, it doesn't seem like they would send all their bishops, right? Somebody's got to stay behind and run the church. But anyway, by the early 4th century, the British Christian community was both organized on a regional basis and it held a distinct episcopal hierarchy. And there are a few, I guess, tantalizing tidbits left behind. We've got inscriptions and other evidence that have names of specific bishops. We don't know anything about them other than that they have their name in an inscription. For example, I was looking up and I saw that on the Risley Park Lanks, there's a fragmentary inscription stating Bishop Exuperius gave this to, and then we can't read the rest. But so there's one bishop. There's a lead salt pan from Shavington in Cheshire, which contains a Latin inscription, which reads of Viventius the bishop. But other than that, we just don't know that much. It's frustrating.
The Romano-British, they're doing their thing for a while, and then a lot of things start changing in the western end of the Roman Empire, and different groups are starting to move along, and that's when the Anglo Saxons come into the story. Who were the Anglo Saxons, and why did they come to the British Isles?
Anglo Saxons is a term that's used for Germanic peoples who lived on the North Sea coast, stretching all the way from what is now Denmark down to what is now the Netherlands, and then, of course, in parts of Germany as well. They left for a variety of reasons. One possible reason, based on some archaeological evidence and some actual kind of environmental evidence that I've read, is that some of their land was being either flooded or made untenable for other reasons. So they weren't able to do the farming that they had always done. And so they were going looking for greener pastures. But another reason, which is very significant, is that they were essentially being hired as mercenaries or a private army by some of these Romano-British. As you mentioned earlier, there was a lot of movement of peoples in the Roman Empire in the 3rd and 4th centuries. And things were really getting bad. You were starting to have all these barbarian tribes coming in. Whether or not that was an invasion or a migration, scholars debate that. But one thing is certain is that the Romans pulled all their legions out of England in 410. We know that. So we have solid documentary evidence for that. And they basically told the local rulers to fend for themselves. They just said, we're out, guys, so good luck. And even before that, there had been migrations or invasions or both of Germanic peoples coming in to Britain, looking for work, looking for land, looking for a better life. But it got really intense after 410, after the Roman legions were pulled out. And I'm just going to call them British now, okay? So when I say British from here on, I'm talking about the Celtic peoples who the Romans left behind. It's much easier to say than Romano-British. So the British were dealing with migrations or invasions or some combination thereof of all kinds of people. You had Scots attacking from the north, Irish attacking from the west, Actually, I should clarify that the Scots were originally Irish people. The Scots came from Ireland and moved to what is now Scotland. But you had Irish kind of people, and Picts were attacking, and you had Saxons attacking, and other Germanic peoples from the North Sea coast. So all hell is breaking loose in Britain. And so here's the story. One of the main leaders, and we don't know what kind of political structure the Romans left behind when they pulled out. We don't know how many different kingdoms or principalities or political units there were, but we do have some documentary evidence from our sources. And I have to stop and say the main sources, we don't have a lot of sources from this time, and the ones we have are written much after the events. We have Gildas. Gildas was probably a Welsh monk who was writing around 550. He wrote a document, but it's mainly a sermon. It's really a Jeremiad condemning the British rulers of the time for their lax practice of Christianity, but it does have some political and military kind of things listed in there. You also have the Ecclesiastical History of the English People by the Venerable Bede, which is a wonderful work. I recommend that everybody read it. It's not very long, and it's pretty easy to read. Bede was writing around 730 or so that's 300 years after what we're talking about. And then you have the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and that's even later. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle was most likely begun under the reign of King Alfred the Great, which is in the late 800s. So, but that's all we have to go by. Well, there's a few other sources that have little tidbits, but we just don't have a whole lot of things that were written at the time. Now, having said that, the sources tell us that there was a Roman ruler, Vortigern, and he supposedly, to help fight off these people coming in, these Scots and these Picts and these others that were invading England or Britain, he calls over across the channel to some Germanic peoples and asks them to come over and be his soldiers, his private army. And I want to read a selection from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. The date of this is 449, but as I mentioned, it was written much later. So you mind if I do that? It's not too lengthy, but I think it's very informative.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, so this is what the Chronicle says. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a list of dates, and it says, in this year, something happened. In this year, something happened, and so on. It can be dry at times, but other times it's very interesting. So 449, the entry is this. This year, Martianus and Valentinian succeeded to the kingdom and ruled 7 years. In their days, Vortigern invited the Anglo race here, and they came here to Britain in 3 ships at Ebba's Creek. King Vortigern gave them land in the southeast of this land on condition that they fought against the Picts. This they did, and had victory wherever they went. Then they sent to Angeln, ordered them to send more help, and ordered them to tell of the worthlessness of the Britons, meaning the people of Britain, and the excellence of the land. They then at once sent here a larger troop to help the other. These men came from 3 tribes of Germany, from the Old Saxons, from the Angles, and from the Jutes. From the Jutes came the men of Kent and the men of White, and the race of Wessex. From the Old Saxons came the East Saxons, South Saxons, and West Saxons. From Angeln, which has stood waste ever since between the Jutes and the Saxons, came the East Angles, Middle Angles, Mercians, and all the Northumbrians. Their commanders were 2 brothers, Hengist and Horsa. First of all, they killed and drove away all the king's enemies, and then they turned on the king and the British, destroying through fire and the sword's edge. So this is the official story, this idea that there were 2 brothers, they brought over some warriors on 3 ships, but that there's probably a kernel of truth in this, but at the same time, as is usually the case with these kind of situations in early history, what really happened is probably much more complicated. There were probably other peoples, including Frisians, Franks, and Danes, migrating to England around this time as well.
There are a lot of other fascinating conversations around that too, with language and culture, but that could take us off on a lot of different angles,
yeah,
if you will. Also, if you are interested in reading the history of the English people from Bede, it's available online pretty easily if you just search for that, or you go to the Fordham University Medieval Sourcebook. They have it they have the whole book in there, which is pretty easy to read.
Yeah, it's divided into short little sections. Very, very doable. Very, very interesting book.
you say that that's the official story, and you say that things are a little bit more complicated. And I like to start with the official story because then you can start to dissect it a bit. Let's dissect the official story of the Anglo Saxons come, they conquer, and everything becomes Anglo-Saxon. What was really going on in the British Isles in this period of the 400s going into the 500s?
Well, that's the problem, Steve, is we just don't know. That's something that people hate to hear. we don't have that much evidence. We definitely know that there were attacks from the north and from the west on the Romano-British, or just the British, if you will. And as far as these names, Vortigern and Valentinian and Martianus, we just don't know anything about these fellas. We don't even know that they really existed. I mean, I tend to be trusting of the sources as much as I can. So I'm sure they probably were real people, but they were seeing their lands overrun by invaders, these wild, crazy Scots and the Picts from the north. And I'm picturing the movie Braveheart. I probably shouldn't because it's not very accurate, but you think about the Scots with their faces painted. The Picts were the people that actually painted themselves, and they needed help, and they didn't have Roman soldiers, and they couldn't raise their own army. So they thought, well, there's all these Germanic guys over there just across, and some of them had already come over. There were Anglo Saxons who had settled in Britain before this massive invasion occurred. So they thought, well, these guys are good fighters. Well, let's get some more over. We'll make them into an army. We'll give them some land and everybody will be happy.
Something that doesn't often get told in the story is that the British did fight back. And there was a period of about 150 years where the Celts and the British and the Anglo-Saxons are living together. What was that situation between the two in that pretty long stretch of time?
It's really more like about a 50-year period. So the big wave of Anglo-Saxon settlers, and it was definitely more than just 3 ships. Even this official, quote-unquote official story from the Chronicle mentions more coming later. But they came over, and they fought, and they defeated the enemies of this King Vortigern, or leader Vortigern. We don't even know if he was a king. And then they seem to have looked around and said, hey, you know what? This is a pretty nice place. Good weather. There's not very many people here. Maybe we can have it for ourselves. And so they rebelled against their leader. And that's when they really started conquering much of what we call England today, starting in the southeast. So they started in the southeast, which makes sense. It's closer to the continent. And then they seem to have fought against the British and pushed them back and pushed them north and west. But around 500 AD, it seems, according to the sources, that there was kind of a stop of the advance of the Anglo-Saxons. The British fought back. They checked the advance. There's a man mentioned named Aurelius Ambrosius, I believe. But this man is actually believed to be the real-life inspiration behind the King Arthur legend. So, I don't know, maybe picture the King Arthur movie that came out maybe 10 years ago or so, where it had
Owen, I can't even remember who. King Arthur.
I think Keira Knightley was in it. You know that one? I didn't see it, but it wasn't like your typical Camelot movie with the round table and all that. I mean, they were wearing armor, Roman style armor and all that. But at any rate, I'm getting off track here, but there seems to have been peace for about 50 years. So from about 500 to 550 AD. But then the Anglo-Saxons went on the offensive again, defeated the British, and they pushed them back out of most of what we call England today. They pushed them mostly into Wales, into Scotland, and southwestern Britain as well. They didn't really mix a whole lot, as far as we can tell. They seem to have generally kept separate, with Anglo-Saxons living mostly, as I mentioned, in southeast England, and the British living in the west, the southwest, and the north. Now, the big question historically is, how much of this was a total conquest? Was there a genocide? Did the Anglo-Saxons kill all the British people that didn't flee and get away? Well, we don't know. Scholars tend to think, for the most part, I think most scholars would say that there was not really a genocide. Sure, they killed a lot of the men. A lot of that was just what happens in battle. But they seem to have, as we see this is another thing we see a lot in history. They let the women live. They let the children live for the most part, and they took the women as their wives. And they may have let some of the men live as well. And so there is some British influence, British or Celtic influence on the Anglo-Saxons, but not a lot. We don't see that many Celtic words in the Anglo Saxon or the Old English language. It's mainly place names. Place names are very conservative, and people tend to keep them even if they conquer the people that gave these places the names they gave them.
If I'm not mistaken, the genetic evidence that's starting to come out now is that there was a lot more mixture, but it's clear from the cultural and linguistic evidence that the culture of the British was pushed to the margins over the course of those centuries. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, definitely. There's a fascinating book about this, which came out, it's probably been close to 15 years now, but it's called Saxons, Vikings, and Celts. Have you read that?
No.
That's a cool book. I can't remember the name of the author. I've read it twice, and they find out that a lot of British have a lot of Viking DNA in them. Of course, the Vikings, that's way after what we're talking about now, but yeah, there's a lot of mixture, definitely a lot of mixture.
And now a word from our sponsors.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World off. K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
AI can help you write, research, and solve problems faster than ever before. But there is a problem. Most AI is built on a worldview that does not reflect biblical truth. That's why Dominion Chat exists. Dominion brings the power of AI under the lordship of Christ. All the benefits of modern AI built on a biblical worldview foundation. Your work matters, but so does your soul. Sign up today at dominion.chat.
The Anglo Saxons established many small kingdoms throughout their area, and some they joined together, they split apart, but there was essentially the big seven: Northumbria, East Anglia, which was kind of in the east, Essex, Kent, Sussex, Wessex, and Mercia. What was the situation and background of those different powers?
Yeah, well, as we saw in the excerpt from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the chroniclers wanted to make this really simple, and they said, okay, the people of Angeln, which is in extreme northern Germany / southern Denmark. Angeln, it's still a place name today, but the people of Angeln were the Angles, and they came over and established East Anglia and Northumbria, and then the Saxons, which is a little bit deeper into Germany, they came over and founded Essex, which Essex is just East Saxony, or the kingdom of the East Saxons. Sussex is South Saxony, and Wessex is West Saxony. And then they said that the Jutes came from modern day Denmark. Some people don't even believe that there were Jutes. I've heard all kinds of interesting discussions on that. But for the most part, there is a place called Jutland. We know that. It was a famous battle in World War I. So there probably were a few tribes that called themselves Jute. And they supposedly established Kent and the island of Wight and Mercia. But I may have those mixed up a little there. But it's obviously that's a very clean and simple version of history where just one entire tribe packs up and moves and resettles themselves in another place. And history almost never works out like that. Probably these people that formed these different kingdoms, they probably were from all over the continent. As we mentioned, there were probably Frisians, which is from in modern day Netherlands and Belgium. There were some Franks. There were probably even some people from Scandinavia. But what happened is they rallied around a single leader, and a king at first was just a war leader, the leader of a war band. If you've read Beowulf, I'm sure you have, Steve, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners have. Beowulf was, and the king, Hrothgar, was the leader of a war band, and they would build a nice hall, and they would sit around drinking mead and throwing bones at each other and things like that, telling great stories and going off and slaying evil monsters. Okay, not the monster part, but they'd go slay other peoples and animals. But over time, they became more organized, more centralized, more and more leaders or warriors would join up with these war leaders, and pretty soon you had what they called a kingdom. And as we saw, you had a lot of small tribes at first, but there was a centralizing process, and you had these 7 main kingdoms arise. And as you mentioned, there were others. There was a kingdom called Lindsey that would pop up from time to time and then would be subsumed into Northumbria or East Anglia. But what would happen is, even with these 7, a lot of times one of them would come out as the top dog. You would have these tribes or these kingdoms, but you would also have one of the kings who the others would pay homage to or acknowledge as their over king or the super king, if you will, the king over the kings. And so I want to mention just some of those. And this title, it wasn't an official title or anything, but it was an informal title, but it was called Bretwalda, which is basically ruler of the Britons. And we're given a list of 7 of these, the ecclesiastical history of Bede. So he mentions one named Alla, king of the South Saxons, is the first one. Caon, king of the West Saxons, that would be Wessex. And then Athelbert, king of Kent, and we're going to talk a lot about him a little bit later. Then Radwald, king of East Anglia. And then it shifts up to Northumbria, the northernmost kingdom, Edwin and Oswald and Oswy. Now, again, are those the only ones? Probably not. There were probably others, but Bede has simplified it to 7. 7, of course, is a special number in Christian theology. So yeah, you would have from time to time one of the kings that would be kind of the boss, the head honcho, and the others would send him tribute or something. We don't really know exactly how they would acknowledge that, but it was nothing like saying, okay, we submit to him. There's not a unified England, and there will not be for a long time, not until after the reign of Alfred the Great. So that really affects the church history as well. The fact that you don't have a unified kingdom makes it very, very hard to have a unified church, but we'll get into that later.
What was the effect of the Anglo-Saxon invasion on Christianity in England?
Once again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but the evidence is not completely clear. Scholars are divided. Surprise, surprise. I think scholars divide as part of their job, right?
Yeah, that's in the description.
If you write papers and books and all you ever say is, yeah, I agree with everything out there that's already, you're not going to be famous. You're not going to get tenure. You have to argue. You have to say, no, what everybody else said is wrong. And here's a new theory. So that's just the nature of the business. But it's also based on finding new evidence and other, just reading the sources in a fresh way. But anyway, so having said that, scholars are divided. Some claim that Christianity in England was nearly wiped out by the Anglo-Saxon invasions. Others claim that a significant number of Christians remain. So there you go. And the truth is probably somewhere in between. But it seems that most Christians fled to Wales, Scotland, and southwestern Britain. And that would be the areas called Devon and Cornwall in the little boot that sticks out in southwest England. And those, of course, lay outside of Saxon control until the time of Alfred the Great. In fact, some of them weren't controlled by the English until much, much later, like Wales, for example.
It's fascinating. It would be really nice to know what was going on more on the ground level than the 10,000 foot level.
It really would, but the Anglo-Saxons were illiterate at first, and they didn't leave behind any kind of documentary evidence. And I'm sure the British, at least the church leaders, would have been literate. Probably the common people were not for the most part, but a lot of what they wrote would have been destroyed in all the fighting, or they might have taken it with them, and things just get lost over the centuries. So it is a shame that we don't know more than we do.
How does Christianity get reintroduced to England? I guess that's kind of a tricky word to say. How do the Anglo-Saxons get introduced to Christianity, which brings Christianity back to the fore in the British Isles?
That's a great question. We do know more about that. Before I answer that, though, let me back up a step and mention what was the religion of the Anglo-Saxons. I think that's
that's a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, it's just kind of important. So they came in, they did have their own religion. They were pagan. They worshipped essentially the same gods as the Vikings. We all know about Thor and Odin. We've watched the movies and throwing around the hammer and tossing around thunderbolts and all that. So you had similar gods to those. They had, instead of Odin, they worshipped Woden. He was very important, the king of the gods, or the head god. Thor, they did worship Thor. They had a god named Tu. A lot of the names of our days of the week are named after them. So, of course, Sunday is named after the sun, and Monday is named after the moon. But Tuesday is named after Tu, the god of war. Wednesday is Woden's day. Thursday is Thor's day. Freya was another god that the Anglo Saxons worshipped, and they were pretty devout, fairly devout religious people. They were devoted to their religion. So when this North Germanic paganism then became the dominant religion in England for the time being. Okay, now let's get to the reintroduction of Christianity. We have two sources, and when I say two sources, I don't mean two books or two major archaeological digs or anything like that. We have several of those. We have much better documentary evidence for what's going on during this period. But to sum it up, and then I'll go in a little bit deeper in just a minute. But to sum it up, Christianity was reintroduced into England, aka introduced to the Anglo Saxons from Rome on one hand, and on the other hand, from the West and the North, from the Irish. So let's go ahead and talk about Rome first, if that's okay, right?
And so that's an important thing to keep in your mind, that they're getting Christianity from two separate directions. That's going to be important.
Right. And they're not exactly the same. The way of practicing Christianity among the Irish and the way of practicing it among the Romans has some significant differences, and that's going to cause some problems later, but we'll save that for a little bit later. So in the late 6th century, very late, in the 590s, 595 or so, Pope Gregory I, we all know and love Gregory the Great. In the Eastern Church, the Orthodox Church, he's called Gregory the Dialogist because he wrote a famous work called the Dialogues. But one of the greatest popes, most significant popes in church history, Gregory I, he sends a group of 40 monks under the leadership of Augustine, and this is Augustine of Canterbury, not to be confused with the famous Augustine of Hippo, the theologian. He's been dead for a long time at this point. But Gregory decides to send 40 monks to England. Now, why did he do this? I didn't put this in the notes, but I can't resist telling the story. You're probably familiar with this as well, I'm sure, Steve, and a lot of our listeners will be. But according to I'm not the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, according to Bede, Pope Gregory was down at the slave market one day in Rome, and he saw these really fair-skinned, very light-skinned, blonde-haired, blue-eyed boys standing there waiting to be sold as slaves. And that they stuck out, right? Because Romans tend to be darker complected and tend to have darker hair. So he said, "Who are these people?" to this one of his aides that was with him. And the guy says, "Well, they're Angles," meaning they're from Anglo-Saxon England. They're of the tribe of the Angles. And Gregory says, "No, they're not Angles, but they're angels," which is a play on words. It's a pun in Latin as well as in English. And Gregory says, "What is the name of their the kingdom that they come from?" And the man says, "Well, they're from Deira." And I should say Deira is half of Northumbria. Northumbria was a kingdom that was made up of two smaller kingdoms, Deira and Bernicia, and sometimes they would be together and sometimes they would be part. But so he says they're from Deira, and Gregory says, "Oh, well, they shall be rescued from the wrath of God then." Because if you look at Latin, de ira means from wrath or from anger. So another pun there for Gregory. And then Gregory says to the man, "Well, what is the name of their king?" And he says, "Allah." And Gregory says, "Alleluia." So, and you listen to some scholars and they'll say, "There's no way this is true." Well, how do you know that? I mean, how do you know it's definitely not true? Others are skeptical. Others say, well, it could have happened. I'm just going to say it might be true. That might be one reason Gregory decided to reach out to these people. I think there's other reasons too. I think Gregory was very much a Roman at heart, and he wanted to spread Romanitas or Romanness to as much of Europe as he could. He knew that the province of Britannia, which is now Anglo-Saxon England at this time, it had been a key part of the Roman Empire, and he wanted to bring it back into the Roman fold. Even there's no centralized Roman Empire anymore, at least not in the West. But there was the concept of Christendom, and everybody was trying to outdo each other and how Roman they were, all these barbarians who were now occupying the former Roman provinces. So I think that's part of it too. He just wanted to bring them back into the Roman fold. And it's possible even that the king of Kent at the time, Athelbert, we mentioned him a little bit ago, Athelbert may have invited Gregory. We don't have any letter, any documents saying that, but there's always politics involved in church history, and especially in this time. Athelbert may have wanted to connect himself more to the Franks than to the rest of Christian Europe. He had a wife who was a Frankish princess, and she was a Christian. So Athelbert, even though he was originally pagan, married a Christian wife. Maybe she exercised some influence over him. Wives tend to do that, don't they, Steve?
Yeah, they sure do.
So there's a lot of reasons. We can't point to just one reason why Augustine decided to send missionaries to the Anglo Saxons. I think it's a combination of all the reasons we've discussed.
When the world is just too much, turn it off and turn on positive, encouraging K-Love.
I'm gonna praise.
World
I
off.
praise the
K-Love on.
K-Love is sunshine for my soul.
I love K-Love.
Listen now on your radio, online, or on the free K-Love app.
K-Love makes me feel so good.
Positive, encouraging K-Love.
AI can help you write, research, and solve problems faster than ever before. But there is a problem. Most AI is built on a worldview that does not reflect biblical truth. That's why Dominion Chat exists. Dominion brings the power of AI under the lordship of Christ. All the benefits of modern AI built on a biblical worldview foundation. Your work matters, but so does your soul. Sign up today at dominion.chat.